Okay, so we're going to kick this session off. This is the fourth in a series that DC LERA has done in conjunction with the U.S. Office of the International Labor Organization on the theme of return to work, getting the U.S. economy and the world economy back to even keel after the pandemic. When I first thought about this, I thought for sure we would be past the pandemic. We'd be at 90% vaccination rates. Neither one of those are true. So we'll see what happens here in the months ahead. But today we have two great speakers from the business perspective. We have Chantel Sheaks, who's the Vice President for Retirement Policy, and Marc Freedman, the VP for Workplace Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Two very knowledgeable folks about the economy and very much in touch with how the business community is reacting and adapting to the changes post-COVID or in the middle of COVID. DC LERA is a membership organization. We encourage all of you to join. We have a webpage where you can just go on and sign up and join the organization. We are a member of a national organization, LERA, Labor and Employment Relations Association, which is headquartered at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Then we have our administrative staff who run the organization, Emily Smith and Bernadette Tiemann, who are behind the scenes, making sure that everything goes smoothly for this session. So without much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marc first to talk about sort of an overview of how the business community is viewing the economy and the work issues today. And then we'll have Chantel talk about retirement issues and how those are affecting the workforce and the economy. And then we'll have time for some questions and dialogue with Marc and Chantel. So if you have a question during the presentation, just use the little icon. It's in different devices, it's in different places, but it's under it says reactions. Put your hand up and I can see those and I will call out your question or call on you to pop up and talk. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marc Freedman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Marc, for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Happy to be with you all. I'm going to try and keep this very top line and give a few, I guess, observations and comments that we've heard from our members. And I suspect some of the things I say are not new to anybody. If you've been following the news at all recently, you've probably heard some of these points being made. Let's start off with the whole question of finding sufficient employees. That really is the biggest challenge businesses and employers are facing right now. Getting enough employees to come to work is paramount. We're seeing stories about employees who don't want to go back to their previous jobs because they didn't like the way they were being treated or they're just burned out. We're seeing stories about employers having challenges with recruiting new employees. The job openings are out there, but they're just not getting filled as much as they need to be. This is leading employers to really be creative, in some cases desperate. They're really, wages are increasing, benefits are increasing. Employers are trying to find new ways to bring people in and to attract the new employees that they need. It's a seller's market. If you're an employee out there, you're someone looking for a job, you're going to have opportunities. You're going to have options, and sometimes that's a good thing. But the challenge is employers are really finding that they're not getting enough people to come in and ramp up to full capacity. One of the areas that this is being seen in the most, and I think this is in the news, is the question of supply chain issues. Manufacturing supply chains, commodities, things like gasoline. The reason gasoline prices are going up is not because of a shortage of gasoline, but because of a shortage of people to move it around the country to get it to the places where people are buying it. That's a logistics and transportation issue, and we're seeing a lot of problems in having adequate people to do those types of jobs. this is, I don't know how this problem is going to get solved. It'll get solved, I guess, over time. One of the threats, I should say threat, one of the possible outcomes here is that certain jobs may end up being converted to robotics or automation. If employers have that much trouble finding employees, the option may be to not worry about employees anymore in some of these cases. I'm not trying to say where that's going to happen. I'm just saying that that's an overall trend that I think may, in some places, get accelerated because of the lack of the ability to find employees. In addition to the questions of whether you have enough employees, the big discussion right now is the vaccine mandates, is whether employers are going to require employees to be vaccinated or show their vaccine status. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of all the different cross currents in this discussion with respect to where some of the states are going and the reactions that this has triggered. But it is one of the things out there that is in the big, questions of employment issues. We've seen a number of companies, employers come out and say that they're going to mandate vaccines for their employees. High profile companies, obviously lower profile companies are doing it too. There are anecdotal examples that suggest that the employee turnover from this is low, but it's not zero. And depending upon what size operation you have, it could create problems with your operations if you have even a small percentage of employees decide they don't want to take the vaccine and decide that they don't want to stay with that company. Currently, and this is where I spend a lot of my time these days, we're all waiting to see what the rulemaking from OSHA is going to look like, the emergency temporary standard that is OSHA is preparing and which could be out. I have no way to tell, but I think it's going to show up within the period of no more than 2 more weeks. And there's a lot of anxiety around that. There's a lot of questions that employers are waiting to see answered and trying to figure out what's going to be expected of them. There are employers who are very concerned that this will accelerate and precipitate employee departures. That there will be employees who say, that's it, I don't want to take the vaccine. You can't make me. There's a job open down the street. I'm going there. They're not covered by the requirement. That could happen. I'm not going to say it won't. It may not happen to the degree that people are afraid of it happening, but it will happen, I think, to some degree. And again, thinking back to our supply chain discussion, if it happens in some of these critical industries, it could really create some significant disruptions. In terms of the supply chain discussion, we're talking about the upcoming holiday season and whether various goods that are related to the holiday season will be able to get to their destinations. That's a real question in the air right now. We're trying to, we're waiting to see how that plays out. We do know that in the context of a vaccine mandate from the government, there are employers who are going to be okay with this, that they actually are looking to do something like that. And the fact that the government will tell them they have to do this is going to give them cover, and that this will actually be, they will receive this well. There are going to be other employers who think differently. So, this is not going to be an easy, all or nothing proposition. It's going to be a very mixed reaction in terms of what it looks like once that shows up. I want to shift gears a little bit to a little bit more of a technical question in the area of workplace policy, and that is the status of independent contractors. I think, as we all understand, the independent contractor model has really been elevated in recent years. It's been out there for a long time. It's not just because of the online platform companies, but because they use it, it's been getting a lot more attention. And that attention, of course, has generated efforts to reduce or restrict, or in some cases even prevent, the use of independent contractors across the board. I think that's unfortunate. We believe that when used properly, and I will acknowledge that there are definitely examples where independent contractors are not used properly, but when they're used properly, it's a model that benefits both parties. It provides flexibility. In a lot of cases, it provides income and allows people to work on their own terms rather than those associated with an employment relationship. And that's the good news. I mean, that's when it's used properly. I think if you follow the independent contractor discussion, you've seen efforts in California to really cut back on the availability of independent contractors, notably what's called AB 5, which is a piece of legislation that codified a California Supreme Court decision known as Dynamics, which put in place what's known as an ABC test. And the ABC test is named that because there are 3 provisions. The bottom line is, under the ABC test, it's very, very difficult to use an independent contractor model. The interesting part about the California legislation, AB 5, is that it includes a extremely high number of exemptions. A lot of different industry settings are exempt from the restrictions under AB 5. That's a sort of interesting little side note, because it means that there's still people who recognize that the independent contractor model is a valuable one to preserve. However, what we have seen is that the Democrats in Congress want to nationalize the AB 5 model, the ABC test, without the benefit of the exceptions. And in particular, they want to do this in the context of the National Labor Relations Act, so that there are many more people considered employees who would otherwise be considered independent contractors. And of course, in the National Labor Relations Act context, that means they would be eligible to be organized by unions. And of course, that's where the Democrats want to go. We think this is a major problem. Obviously, we're not in support of that legislation. In fact, we're very opposed to it. In another setting, the Department of Labor has rescinded a regulation that was issued by the Trump administration that would have brought clarity to the question of who's an independent contractor or an employee under the Fair Labor Standards Act context. So this is FLSA versus NLRA. Department of Labor oversees the FLSA, and that's the law that gives us things like minimum wage and overtime. And so the Trump administration issued a regulation to provide clarity and more context as to when somebody would be considered an independent contractor. Unfortunately, this administration has rescinded that regulation as if it never existed. So we're back to a status quo ante, which leaves employers in a lot of cases very unsure where what the proper classification for somebody is going to be. We expect that this administration is going to pursue a new regulation in that space, which I think is going to, again, make it hard for employers to know whether they've properly classified somebody, and which is likely to result in many fewer independent contractors being considered legitimate. That's unfortunate, I think, for the reasons I stated above about the value of the independent contractor model when used successfully. And let me just say, I think the Department of Labor has enough tools right now to go after the improper uses of independent contractor. They don't need a new regulation to help them in that direction. I think this is just going to end up in making independent contractors much less available for all parties, which I think would be unfortunate. I'm going to take a pause right there and allow for questions to surface. Those are the opening remarks I had with respect to what employers are facing in terms of getting back up to speed, in a general sense. So, Steve, if you want to let Chantel come in here.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Great, quick overview of a bunch of thorny issues and controversial ones for sure. And Chantel, if you can jump in there with your area of expertise, which is is really looking at retirement and how prepared is the workforce. We sort of have shifted gears from saying like people are not ready to retire to, oh my God, everyone's retiring. So why don't you give us a perspective on retirement and retirement policy that you're looking at now?
Sure. Well, before I do that, I do want to jump into one quick thing to dovetail on what Marc is saying, is that we are also looking at a lot of the rules and policy implications of independent contractors, and not just, you know, your gig workers as you think about it, but true independent contractors, and how to provide not just retirement, but other employee benefits for them. And if anyone is interested in this topic, especially in the area of retirement, the Pew Charitable Trust has done an enormous amount of work. They have released about 4 papers on this, and will be releasing more soon. We're working closely with them just on digesting and looking at that, because I think, unfortunately, what's going to be even more confusing in this area, as Marc has said, you have the definition for the National Labor Relations Act, you have a definition for the Fair Labor Standards Act. Guess what? There's a separate definition under ERISA of whether somebody is an employee, and then you have a different definition under the tax code of whether someone's an employee. And then you have all these states coming in of who is an employee. And so at the end, I'm seeing there's just like a lot of confusion in this area. And I think there's also a lot of confusion in this area with respect to the benefits. And that's where some of the Pew research, and I think Ebri will be doing some research on this as well, is who actually needs what type of benefits. Because if you're coming in as an independent contractor, where this may just be, I need a little bit extra money, but I have my full-time job as an employee over here, you're probably already covered under a benefits platform. So what we see is some of this trying to shove everybody into the same space, which is kind of leads me to what I was going to talk about in my prepared remarks. Is when I was thinking about doing this, I was really thinking about, there's no one size fits all what's happening in the benefits and the retirement arena with respect to what's happened with COVID. Because, so I tried to define it as the haves and the have-nots. You kind of have to look at it that way when you're looking at the employees, because then you're going to look at, well, what's the reaction that employers are going to do with this? So think about it kind of like with the haves. I think all of us who are on the phone today were very, very lucky. We kept our jobs. I was able to work from home. I was able to work from home before the pandemic and work from home during the pandemic. And for those people who kept their jobs, guess what? They kept contributing to their 401k plans. A lot of them were able to do it. I looked at some research according to Fidelity Investments, and it said the average balance in their IRA accounts at the firm rose about $13,000 from 2019 to 2020. And that gives us a lot of really good hope that that's a really good increase for going toward retirement security. Another thing that we were really very concerned about during the first round of, I kept losing track of all the different legislation at the beginning of the pandemic of this one, but where they were going to allow for coronavirus related distributions for your 401k plan. For those of us who are in the retirement world, we always kind of get nervous because something happens and you want to jump immediately to your 401k plan and say, well, somebody needs a distribution for this. They need a distribution for that. They need a distribution. Then all of a sudden you have nothing left when you turn, 65, 67, because you've now taken all of your distributions. But it was also something difficult to oppose, because if I can't feed my family right now and I need this money, it's not going to really matter very much in 25 years, whether or not it's there. So there's kind of a happy medium. But the good thing is those people who kept their jobs didn't need to take it. And we actually saw a very, very small uptake in coronavirus related distributions. CRDs, it's easier to say. Vanguard studies said that only about 2% of their participants actually took a coronavirus related distribution. And of that, under the rules, you could withdraw up to $100,000 and you wouldn't get penalized for it. And of the 2%, only 4% of the 2% actually took the full $100,000. So I think that's a very positive side that people were not touching their retirement plans. But kind of talking on what Marc was going to is, guess what, on the have side, if you had the money and you retired, we were seeing a very high number of retirements. And according to some of the financial advisors, what they're now seeing now is kind of the, you know what, life is too short. If I have the money now, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And what we also saw, there was a source from eBree did some research on this, and that they found during the COVID recession, there was a much higher percentage of higher income individuals who decided to retire earlier. So if you could, you did. So where does that now leave the people that we call like the have-nots? Because there were those people. There were people who lost their jobs. Some of the people who lost their jobs or who may have lost their income, unfortunately, they're now going to have to work longer. According to some of the research I looked at, over last year, before the pandemic, there were about 68 million people who said they were going to have to work longer than they thought they would need to for retirement. That's up by over 1 million people who are now going to have to work longer in retirement. In addition, we saw in about 2020, about 22 million Americans actually just stopped contributing to their retirement plan. And what that means is you stop now, whether you're 20, you're 30, you're 40, you're going to be behind the 8 ball when it's time for you to retire. Luckily, by March of 2021, we've seen the number, it dropped to 14 million. So I think that's a positive move. But I think that we have to keep an eye on that, because I know a lot of people think today, well, I have to do it today, and nobody's really thinking about 20 to 25 years later. But the impact of what it is going to be the big impact on employers. And this is where I think employers are kind of all over the board on really what to do with this. Because you have a combination depending on where you are, and it can even be within your own workforce, where you have some late retirees who are continuing to work on, which means you can't bring new workers in. You may have workers who are staying longer than they want to stay. They may not be as productive. And studies have shown that, myself included, I am an older worker. Older workers generally cost more when it comes to benefits. And so you have these workers who are staying. On the other hand, you have other older workers who are leaving, which is creating this huge problem, because you have this significant number of people who are leaving the company when you thought they were probably going to stay a little bit longer, which is really, I think, making succession planning. And I have been when I was in the workforce, non-association work, succession planning was a big part of what I would do as a consultant. And I can say you companies have never been great at succession planning. And I think this has thrown the biggest wrench into any kind of succession planning that they had wanted, because they now have employees who they thought they were going to have for another 5 years just walked away. They also have employees they thought who were going to leave who are now just staying. So I think succession planning is really going to be taken up to another level that it hadn't been before. But I kind of want to switch over to, well, we have succession planning, but we also have to take another look at our benefits, because I think that the pandemic has made business, and Mark and I can even say this, even our own business, businesses you may never have thought about, take a look at their benefits and their benefit structure. So I found a study from 2018, and when it was asking, well, what are your top benefits, you as an employee, what do you want? So competing benefits, number 1 and number 2, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, 401k match and health insurance. The next one was paid time off, then pensions, and then flexible work hours. So that was 2018. SHRM put out a study from 2020 about, okay, what are the top benefits that you want? We've now seen a switch to healthcare, which I don't think anybody's going to doubt that healthcare is probably going to be one of the top benefits that people want no matter what. But I think some people may be, I'm not surprised, but some people may be a little bit surprised. The next were flexible work, leave, family-friendly, wellness, and retirement then dropped. Retirement went from number 1 down to number 6. And so I think businesses are still focused on retirement, because you have to be, just because your employees aren't thinking about it, you still need to be thinking about it. But I think that they're also thinking about other areas. So I want to talk next, just kind of jump really quickly about how business are thinking about paying for all of these benefits. Because, I've done negotiations before, we've all been in the room, and guess what? There's only one pot of money. It's not like money's going to magically appear and it's like, oh, great, So how are employers thinking about paying for it? And the one thing, and I will say with respect to pension plans, pension plans in some ways, and I'm doing research for another presentation I'm giving to the American Academy of Actuaries. I know, sounds exciting, but y'all can't wait, on pension funding. But even if you look at it, pensions kind of were a thing of the past. And even in the past, when they were at their heyday, they only covered 28% of the private workforce. So even when they were there, they didn't cover as many people as we thought that they covered. And there's also a myth really of that people stayed forever. They got the watch at the end, they got this huge pension. So I went back and I was looking at some research going back to 1967. Even then, the average was less than 5 years that people stayed at the job. So I think we built this urban myth that everybody back in the day stayed at the job forever. They had these pensions, and it really wasn't that way. But a lot of our members still do have pensions. Our larger members do. I think almost all of them, except maybe one or two, have frozen their pensions. And a big part of it comes down to cost. And they're looking to wind these down. Some of the regulations that we've had over the years have not encouraged. The Pension Protection Act has a nickname called the Pension Destruction Act or the Pension Prevention Act. And right now we are seeing such fluctuations with interest rates that we have some members, by changing the interest rate, it can be a difference of $500 million that they have to contribute to their plan. And a business just cannot run on that, and their employees can't run on that either. And we're more and more seeing employees don't have as much of the interest. And finally, one of the things that's really difficult for most employers of maintaining the pension plans, in addition to the volatility, is just PBGC premiums. We've seen PBGC premiums go out the roof. So what we're now seeing is a lot of employers are looking at de-risking. And it depends on how you de-risk it. It can be good, it can be bad. Buying in an annuity, I think, is probably the most positive way you can de-risk your pension plan, because the individual still has the protection of that lifetime guarantee and the income. It also depends, unfortunately, what state you buy that income in. If it's in the plan, as many of you know, you'll get federal protection under ERISA. Unfortunately, some states are really good for protections for annuitants, such as New York. Some are not as good. I'm not going to name those states. But another way of de-risking is lump sums. They will lump sum people out. And plans are not doing this because they're evil. Part of the reason that they're doing this is if I lower the number of people in my plan, my PBGC premiums go down dramatically. I have one large employer that member who pays something like over $2 million in PBGC premiums alone. And this company is probably one of the strongest companies. They are not going out of business anytime soon. Their plan is funded very well, yet they're throwing all this money away to PBGC premiums. So that's a big reason people are moving away from the DB side. And I do know some of you may be interested in multi-employer. I'm not going to get into a lot of depth on it. If you are interested, please reach out to me. I've spent a lot of my time on this. We did have the American Rescue Plan that provided for special financial assistance for multi-employer plans. It's a start. It's not a solution. Unfortunately, what happened with the interpretation that we've gotten from the PBGC, the intention was that they would give life to these plans for another 30 years. Some of the plans, because of such a narrow interpretation that we're seeing from the PBGC of how much funding can go in, these plans might only have another 15 years. And this creates a problem that goes back to what Marc was saying about the supply chain. One of our members is in the trucking industry. They need to hire 1,500 people today because of retirements, because of attrition. And it's really difficult to say to somebody who's 24 or 25 to say, we're going to contribute to this fund on your behalf. And if it stays solvent, you'll get a good benefit. But right now they're projecting it's probably going to be insolvent right around the time you retire. Or do you want to go over to our competitor here who has a 401k plan with a healthy match? So for some of the employers in the multi-employer plans, they were very grateful for the relief that they got through ARPA, but are a little bit frustrated because it's not that they don't want to be in these plans, but what it's doing to their business, they need to hire people now. And if they can't hire those people, that goes to a supply chain issue. And then finally, I just kind of want to tie it up to going back to DC plans. There's a shift, and it's not like it's a shock that people are shifting over to defined contribution rather than defined benefit plans. But I think employers are finally waking up to, it can't just be about accumulation. And it also can't be about accumulation when people don't have money to put into it. So employers are realizing, again, employees only have a pot of money. You have to pay your rent, you have to pay for food, you have to pay for so many other things. So one of the benefits that people are really looking at right now, two things. The biggest one is financial education. The financial education that people have in this country is abysmal. And the schools are not stepping in to do much on it. So a lot of employers are actually stepping in for financial education, whereas before it was just education about your retirement plan, like this is what a match, these are your investments, this is how it works. This is a more broader based education to people to understand, whether it's how to understand their personal finances, how to understand retirement in the future, how to pay for college, how to pay for other things. And then what employers have also realized is there's been a switch about the hierarchy of needs, because I think COVID was a wake-up call to everyone about the financial hierarchy of needs. That if I don't have that savings to help me out, I can just be completely devastated. And I'm going to maybe tap into my retirement plan because I don't have that base savings. So what employers are trying to do, and we are working on legislation to make it easier for employers to be able to help their employees through this, is to set up emergency savings accounts and helping these individuals who want them set up the emergency savings accounts to get people in the process of saving. And then once you hit a certain threshold, we're looking probably about $2,000. That money then automatically would just go over to the 401k plan. And this will help in two different ways. One, it gets people to save. And we're not talking about a lot of money to begin with, $5, $10, but the employer would subsidize it. So you're not going to get the charges, you're not going to get anything like that. But then it also keeps that money over here. So eventually when they do put the money in their retirement plan, the money can stay in the retirement plan and they can use this little pot of money over here for the emergencies when they truly need it. Because if you can't pay for your car to get fixed, you can't go to work. And if you can't go to work, you can't get any money. It's like this awful, everybody on here knows what it is. And then the final thing I think that people are looking at to help their employees, and I think it has become important now, is for those employees who do have money in their 401k plan, what do you do with it? And even a lot of us on the phone will be like, okay, I've got $50,000. What do I do with it? We'll call Steve and Steve will tell us how to invest it. But what employers are looking to do is, are there different ways that we can emulate the DB model to make sure people have that lifetime income that they need without interrupting them to also have that cushion? Our philosophy on this and what we're working with regulators on is we think that lifetime income, there's a time and a place for it. We don't think that you need to annuitize all of your 401k balance, because if you only have $30,000 and you just annuitize $30,000, you had some really bad advice. But we are looking at other options for different people. And I know that's what employers are really looking at, because they want to make sure that these individuals are protected in the future so they can retire, and then you can bring in the newer generation. So I think those are a lot of the big things that our members are looking at. And COVID, I think, has been a wake-up call on the retirement side, recruitment, retention, a little bit of everything. So that's what I've got.
That's fantastic, Chantel. Thanks so much. And it's a lot of issues there. And we will open it up for questions here. So folks, just raise your hand with the little reaction gizmo on your screen, and I'll call on you to ask a question. But I'll start off with the first one, though, for both you, Marc, and Chantel. And, I probably should have done a better job setting this up. Most people know who the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is, but could you just spend just 2 minutes describing who your membership is? You're not the Business Roundtable, and you're not the National Federation of Independent Businesses. How do you sort of fit in the landscape of business organizations? What is sort of the typical member? And also, how do you get feedback from those businesses? What is sort of the mechanism that they're telling you about what their issues are?
Well, I let me take a first stab at it. I mean, you mentioned BRT, which is explicitly the Fortune, I think, 200 company CEOs, and then NFIB, which is a very prominent representative of small businesses. We're both of those and everything in between. And we get a lot of direct input from our members through a committee structure we have. And then, for instance, with this OSHA ETS thing that we're all waiting to see, I'm just getting pinged, left and right from companies throughout the chamber membership saying, what do you know about this? What's happening? What can you tell us? So it comes in all forms. Direct. We have regular committee meetings where we have, opportunity to tell our members directly what's going on. Those that are interested in the agendas that we follow. And then, as I said, if something big comes along, we just get it from all corners of our membership.
Yeah, and I think where we're different on the retirement side, Steve, and benefits in general, but especially on the retirement side, our members are everyone. So there's the ERISA Industry Committee, the American Benefits Council. They represent just plan sponsors. Right. We have plan sponsors, but we also have service providers. So we're looking at, Fidelity, Vanguard. We're also very different. I mentioned the multi-employer plans. There are very few people who, outside of NCCMP, really represent employers, represent multi-employer plans. We're representing the view of the employers with the multi-employer plans. And I think my favorite part with this is where we also get input was my favorite thing I've done so far at the chamber was give a joint briefing on multi-employer plans, US Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO. We actually had staffers taking pictures of our placard because I think it blew their minds so much. But I think that's where we are unique in the benefits world from that. And if you have a question on any type of benefit, we probably have a member who covers it. And similar to what Marc was saying, we also have an employee benefit committee that is made up of plan sponsors, service providers, and as well as a retirement subcommittee for those people who really like to dig deep into the really, really technical side of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And we do have a question from Morley Gunderson. But before Morley jumps in with this question, I actually wanted to, there's a good setup, Chantel. Those of you who don't know the icon behind Marc, that's the White House and the monument. But in the geography of Washington, D.C., the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO are separated by less than a block. And so
we're separated by Black Lives Matter Plaza right now.
I know, but it is literally half a block. And so
the view behind me is from our roof. If that tells you anything.
It could have been from the AFL-CIO's roof, though. So
except they wouldn't let me up there.
So, but that's kind of the question do you foresee a different look? Everyone is in the same predicament. Companies are unionized companies and non-union companies are having a hard time staffing and figuring out the next step. Do you see more opportunities, or do you see other opportunities besides the one that Chantel mentioned about the multi-employer pensions, where you're working together with the AFL and the chamber are actually have dialogue on some of these issues?
Some yes, some never. So, I think it's well known that we have been partnering with the union movement in pursuing the infrastructure package. And that's a very classic example. We've been working with them over the years. Every time infrastructure is mentioned, it's something that we are collaborating with the unions on. In my portfolio of workplace issues, the chances for collaboration are very slim. we're just typically not on the same page there. Gotcha. So, immigration, there's another one that we often have some type of interaction with the unions on in some cases. Those are the two areas I would say are most likely for us to be able to work with the union movement on, in addition to some of the things that Chantel does.
Great. Marley, why don't you take yourself off mute and you can have your question and introduce yourself first too. There you go.
I'm Marley Gunderson at the University of Toronto in Canada. So I'm not as familiar with the US system as I should be, but let me ask a question that relates to Canada at least, and probably to the US, and that is, what are the impacts of any of the clawback features of the public and private pension systems that actually discourage continued employment, and with their barriers to continued employment because income is clawed back if you at certain levels and in certain programs, or is that prominent in the US?
No, it is also a problem in the United States with Social Security to a lesser extent. And, that is definitely one of the things that we're looking at. I think you can only make up to $12,000 before there starts to be the offset. But part of the Social Security is a little bit different because you do make it up at the back end. And some people just have a misunderstanding of how it works. It has been an issue, I know, with some of the multi-employer plans, and there's also an issue with the single employer plans with defined benefit plans, that if you go back to work, your pension stops. However, it's not really technically a clawback because you then start accruing benefits again. So that's the positive thing. I don't know in other systems that if you don't accrue, but if you come back, you have to accrue benefits the same as anyone else would do it. You just can't. And in a way of fairness is you can't pull down your pension and accrue more benefits, all of it at the same time. So it's really a wash. But one of the things with a defined contribution plan, not an issue at all. Because with a defined contribution plan, it's your money. It's a lump sum. You can take it without penalty at age 59 and a half. So that issue doesn't exist with the DC plans.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Jeff Wheeler, I'm going to call you out here because the work that you're doing on supply chains is so critical. Jeff worked at the Department of Labor for a while and is now working on these critical issues about the supply chains. And Jeff, just give us a comment or two of what you're working on and what some of the issues are that you'd like to see the Chamber of Commerce look at.
I had, I guess, more limited questions, but I head up a project on improving compliance with labor standards, including prohibition of child labor and forced labor and global supply chains for Elevate Incorporated, which does a lot of consulting and managing a project funded by the Department of Labor. So supply chain standards are a really big piece of what we're doing. And it's a fascinating and growing area. Well, what I wondered, in terms of employment relationships, a question really from Marc, given how there is such a need to hire, Elevate has this issue too of hiring and retaining work. If there's been kind of a rethink of the nature of the employment relationship, like what do workers want? Do they want permanent employment? In many cases they do, with its stability. In some cases they may not. They may want a contracting relationship, but maybe enhance some things. So I'm wondering if there's been a rethink by the employers about the nature of the employment relationship as related to how they structure it, how they attract. And then for Chantel, just a quick thought from my experience too, which is everybody's into equities. All the retirements, the IRAs are in equities because that's where the returns are, which is great for now. But if this economy takes a real downturn, and it could, it seems that retirement security is going to be in real trouble very quickly. And so without having the diversified portfolios, and there's a lot of reason why people don't, how do we deal with that risk? So a couple of quick questions.
Well, let me just try to talk a little bit about the nature of the employment relationship. I think you're right there. And I think some of this falls along some generational breaks. So, one of the things that is so obvious, and this call demonstrates it, is how technology has become commonplace and a central way for things to happen. I mean, let's face it, I actually generally prefer working from home now. I'm actually in my office right now, but I have the option to work from home for most of the days of the week, and I tend to prefer that.
Things I never thought I would hear Marc say when I first started working with him.
I prefer working from Chantel's home, but she won't let me in. But 5 years ago, if this whole situation hit 6 years ago, I don't think we'd be in the same position.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing is that there are employers who, in order to attract employees, are saying, we'll let you work from home. That this is now a selling point. And that's possible because of the technology that we have in front of us, and the flexibility for a lot of work, obviously not all, but some types of work to be done in remote locations or any location. So the nature of that employment relationship the nature of the relationship may not be shifting as much as where you do the work is shifting. And that's, I think, becoming a more common narrative in terms of how employers are bringing people in. And whether people like it or not, that's sort of, we're past that question. It's now part of the zeitgeist.
Chantel, did you want to jump in on that too?
Well, and I think talking about just the retirement side of it, the retirement piece, I definitely agree. I mean, the money's in equities, but we saw this in 2008. Every time the market takes it, that is the very downside of a DC plan. That it's a defined contribution. That's how they work. I define how much money I put in it. I put it in there, and it's up to you. What we're facing right now in a project we're working on, and I also want to touch on some questions in the chat, is a lot of employers would like to do a little bit more as far as education, because if anybody is putting all their money in equities, that's bad. If you're putting any of your money in any one thing, that's bad. We all know that. But then the question is like, okay, but then what else do I put it in? And we do know from research, too many options in your 401k plan that's bad. Not enough. The sweet spot's probably about 10. But even then, how do you decide that? Is most of our employees have other things to do rather than, although some of the employees, I do love it when I talk to a lot of the companies that have engineers, they actually have all these little charts and they do that, and they're hilarious. But your average Joe, including me, I don't want to spend the time doing it. So I think that goes back to the financial education part of it. And what we will be seeking from the Department of Labor is more clarification of education versus fiduciary advice. And this is a huge issue for employers, because currently this is a voluntary system. An employer does not need to provide a plan. Don't have to. However, most do, because going back to recruiting, like I would not go to a company that didn't have a 401k plan. I'd be like, you're crazy. Everybody has a plan. But there's been this huge mass litigation by a handful of class action attorneys against plan sponsors. And what we're seeing the insurance go up to a point where they now have $1 million deductibles, which means the company has to pay that. And companies want to help, employers want to help, because if you have broke employees, you have unhappy employees, they're not effective. But employers are really scared. So I think that goes over to the financial education, and they're doing as much as they can, but perhaps getting a little bit more clarity from the Department of Labor. The last time we came out with anything from the Department of Labor, I want to say was 99, maybe. And then with the whole thing of the fiduciary advice thing that just won't die, then that was all rescinded. Now it's back in place. And one of the things I gave testimony to Department of Labor this year, I said that it's time for us to revisit that. And I think that's something that both labor and union can look at, is because I think one of the things that everybody thinks is an educated workforce is a good workforce.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions in the chat from Tequila. Tequila, did you want to pop on there just because I thought the other half of your question was interesting as well. A little depressed about Marc's lack of enthusiasm about working with the AFL-CIO, but Tequila, you sort of put an idea out there of, boy, that seems like something that business and labor could work on together.
Yeah, and based on Chantel's other comments, why not the Department of Labor? it seems as though young people don't get any training in this. They don't think about these things when they enter the job market. They don't think about 401ks. They don't think of benefits. They just leap out into the job market without having any of these ideas. Like my mother, she was a single mother for much of her adult life, and she never participated in retirement programs at her jobs. And so when she retired, all she had was Social Security. And, I think a lot of people in the country are like that. So it might be something you guys could work on. Is there any possibility of partnerships like that?
No, I definitely think that is a very good idea. And that's one of the first steps, what we wanted to, yep, she did. And actually, any of you who are interested, I say this being on the EBRI Board of Trustees, but she will be speaking at the EBRI December meetings. If you want more information about those, please reach out to me, or I can send the information to Steve. They are open up to the public. Definitely one of the things, and that's why I think the first thing is that we will be trying to work with the Department of Labor to update the guidance that they had. That wasn't me. Work on the guidance that they had, but also I have given recommendations on education and having them update, not just general, but also looking at some of the research from EBRI of how people save based on their race, gender, and ethnicity, because that's another area of retirement that they were starting to look in. And I'm going to, one of the issues that we do have, and how do you change this, is even where we're seeing the state-run plans, there's still a 30% opt-out rate.
Yeah.
So even where there are plans, it's not one of those things like build it and they will come.
Right.
So that is definitely something I'm happy to work with anybody, and I think it's a good idea.
Fantastic. We're coming, as I expected, we would go through this hour very quickly. There's many more topics we could talk about and follow up on, but I'll give each of you a last word, Marc and Chantel, if you want to just sort of wrap up a minute or two. Any words of wisdom for our membership? And again, we're an organization that brings together business, labor, academics, government officials. So folks are, particularly on the academic side, are really interested in researching things that could potentially work.
Well, let me take my first shot at it. We're no longer in Kansas anymore. We're not going back. Many things have changed. Technology has impacted how work gets done in a lot of settings. Employers are trying to be creative in terms of bringing people in. I think the future is all about controlling the virus and getting us to a point of comfort with respect to exposure and therapeutics and those types of questions. I'm optimistic. I mean, I think we'll get there. I wouldn't want to suggest when we'll feel that way. It may differ from location to location and industry to industry. But, clearly we're making progress. The vaccines are the big story now. We'll keep pressing. I mean, things keep moving. The economy is dynamic. All these things are going to continue to evolve and talk to us next year. We'll see where we are.
Good. Chantel, you get the last word.
Well, just to echo kind of what Marc is saying, I think it's fluid, but I think it has been a wake-up call for everyone involved, is that it's not the status quo, it's not Kansas, it's not whatever you want to do anymore. And I think everyone needs to be fluid with respect to what benefits you provide, how work gets done, and to keep the economy going.
Fantastic, great conversation. The recording will be posted on the DC LERA webpage. Marc and Chantel, Marc, I'll take it that you offered up Chantel as well. We will take you up on bringing you back next year, and we can see where we're at, if in fact we're building back better, or we're spinning our wheels, or if it's,
or if we're both, with all three of us are retired, that could be
exactly. That might be a good thing. Anyways, really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Bernadette and Emily, for hosting as always. And we'll have a session with Paul Clark, professor from Pennsylvania State University, on November the 10th, and Mike Abbott from Air Canada on November 17th. We'll be posting those on our webpage here shortly, and hope you can join us for those conversations. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Chantel and Marc. Great conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.